Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Inside the Mind, a podcast about athletes. Today's guest is with a basketball coach out of the Brooklyn area by the name of Arthur Felder, and he really got into depth about how he uses mindfulness training with his basketball students and players. Before we get into it, roll the intro. What's your day kind of looking like as a basketball coach day to day? Is it a Monday to Friday thing? Is it a more of a 24/7 thing?
Yeah, so I actually don't actively coach currently,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I run a coaching business.
Right.
I run a training and development business called Mindful Warrior, and we, provide basketball and mindfulness training to third graders through eighth graders, and we have programs that happen all throughout the week. So that's kind of what my day looks like most of the time, reaching out to my parents and reaching out to my athletes and letting them know about the different programs that they can come to for the day for training, either training movement, training mindfulness, training in basketball, or training in fitness. We kind of combine all those things together.
Mm-hmm. And the mindfulness piece of it, is it all done
Yeah.
on the court, or do you do some of it kind of off the court, maybe in like a lecture or workshop setting?
Yeah, we do it both ways. We do it both ways. So on the court, we do a lot of proprioception work. I actually do some sensory work. So part of our program, we light incense. We take our shoes off on the basketball court and and feel the floor, so all of this is our mindful techniques and tactics to get our athletes to kind of be operating on multiple planes.
For the proprioception, what's kind of the like the goal that's for coming out of it? Is it kind of to calm the person down, so they're kind of maybe at a more, calm-minded frame of reference, I guess? Or what's the outcome that you're
Uh,
looking for that kind of stuff, like taking the shoes off and that kind of stuff?
yeah, yeah. So what we're looking for. So proprioception is more about just kind of being able to feel yourself in space and time. There are a lot of sport in general is done off of feel. Because you'll have your peripheral vision, but even out of the sight of your peripheral vision, you still were able to kind of like grab the basketball. Think about it. All the guys who are going for alley-oops, for dunks, you never see them look at the basketball. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they're looking at the rim. That's proprioception, their ability to feel where they are in space and time and just locate the object, right? So
Mm-hmm.
those are the things, right? And that's why someone like even myself, who was a great leaper in high school, but I couldn't catch a lot of alley-oop dunks, because I just didn't have great, feel for where my body was in space and time and while I'm in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those guys who can, Vince Carter, I mean, Vince Carter comes to mind like crazy because in North Carolina, all he did was catch alley-oops. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, it was crazy to watch. But
And being up here in Canada, I mean, we had firsthand experience of that as well.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Vince, man, what an amazing athlete, and then the way he's been able to extend his career and how mentally sharp he stays and how relevant he stays in the game. It's a miraculous feat for any human.
Yeah,
So
and even I always think back to when he had his time in Toronto, because it's a little bit different. I feel like being a basketball player in Toronto versus somewhere in the States, because you kind of have the whole country behind you instead of
yeah,
a particular
yeah, yeah,
city or a state or something. So
yeah.
I could just, I couldn't even begin to imagine, I guess, the amount of pressure someone like
Mm,
Vince Carter had, where he not only has, the city of Toronto he's representing, but he's pretty much representing the country of Canada with his
mm,
basketball play as being
yeah,
a Raptor.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was immense pressure.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so to answer the rest of your question, so that's what our proprioception training is about. But the shoes off and the incense burning and are those things are just, I want, when I say I want my athletes operating on multiple planes, is I want, their senses to be so active, and for them to be so present in the moment, that we're in, so that way they can kind of grow that love, that endurance, that it takes to continue to play basketball,
Hmm.
there's a when we say love for the game, um, I think there's a deeper definition to it, it's really a feel, I got a little weird, but uh, so it's just it's a great way to train, to train the body. My athletes love it. I love doing it. Um, yeah, and we're, that's our mindfulness training and visualization training. So you had also mentioned, you know, was it kind of allowing them to feel comfortable and feel like they were there already? Um, that's what our visualization training does, So, the idea is that um, you come into the gym, you're getting your work in practice, you're going off the floor for some time, you're visualizing exactly what you just did, exactly the way it felt. And the more cues I can give you, incense burning, the way the floor felt. You know what I mean? So now
Hmm.
all of these things are recalled in your visualization. And when you go home and you think about, the next day, the game, the practice, what you need to do better, you can put yourself in that space with all the things, that were there to kind of help you bring yourself back. The smells, the sounds, everything, you know.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it kind of reminds me of I don't play guitar too much right now, but I used to be a pretty avid guitar player. And when I was really, knee deep into it, it's almost like I could play it without looking, or even I can just have my eyes closed and just feel the strings and just know. Like it's hard to explain, but you kind of just like know what to do, and it's
yeah.
almost become second nature. And it kind of seems like that's the end goal of mindfulness training and stuff like that, is so that the things we're doing on the basketball court, it's almost just like innate to them. It's just second nature. They almost don't even think about it.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah. It's to create the human experience, is what mindfulness is. Because I think a lot of us are complicating, all of us are complicating the human experience. But I really believe that the human experience is a mindful experience, just conscious of all the things, that are around you that were put here for you to admire,
Mm.
and be in awe of, Um, so that's the mindfulness experience, and that's what, I think mindfulness ultimately should help you achieve.
Yeah. So is this something that you do with all ages for basketball players, or do you kind of do different mindfulness techniques maybe for different ages or different competitive levels?
Yeah, no, it's for all ages.
Yeah.
This is a top to bottom thing. Like, again, like I said, it's about the human experience, and we're all human, and we're having a human experience. So, mindfulness teaches you how to have the best human experience you possibly can, so that
Mm.
you're not stuck in the future, or forecasting to the future, or you're not stuck in the past or reliving the past. But if
Hmm.
you're present, you're in the present moment, you can have a human experience. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be a great experience, but it'll still be a present human experience, and it'll pass. Nothing stays forever.
Hmm. It's interesting how much like sports just applies to just life in general, and
That's
kind of
exactly what it
we
is.
we maybe from an outside perspective, some people might think that you're doing basketball mindfulness training or something, and they may only see the benefits of it on the basketball court or something, or the same for football or soccer or something. But really, when you're doing this with athletes, you're just improving their quality of life overall, because a lot of these things that we talk about, they not only apply to basketball, but they apply to real life as well. So I think there's a real inherent value in athletes going through these processes, not just for their game, but just for life overall.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it translates, I think we all, if are in corporate America, or, if you're in, in wherever you are, blue collar worker, I think we know one person maybe, who's just like killing it and just comes, to work or to the space with this like zest for life, even though everything around them may not be, something to be excited about. Um, I just think they're locked in a little bit more, and we're not talking about athletes, what I mean, we're talking about someone else who, is practicing mindfulness in their life, and is having a human experience at work, while working on cars, or working as a garbage man, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, so you know, uh, putting together these techniques and putting a mindfulness practice into your life, and a visualization practice into your life, and kind of taking every moment, even like this moment right now, to kind of be still, see what's around you, smell what's around you, close your eyes, hear what's around you. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
you almost need one sense off, in order to kind of like take in the other senses.
Yeah.
Um, so I would challenge everyone who, you and then everyone who's listening or could be listening, at some point, during the day when they're hearing this, to, really just like find some way to be really, really present in the moment by challenging your senses. I think that's a way that I tell my kids, or my athletes, or even my friends, to practice, to pick up a mindfulness practice that challenges kind of like that moment. So like sit in that moment and cover your ears, like, and just kind of like look around without hearing, and see what you pick up, you know?
Yeah. It's
Um,
kind of like, when you hear people that, for whatever reason they've gone blind or deaf or something,
yeah,
and then their other senses just they almost like pick up the slack, but they
yeah,
get like they're just so fluent, or they just
yeah,
excel so much with those senses, right? And I think another
yeah,
thing too, a lot of things that we're talking about here, it's not as easy as it sounds, because,
yeah,
things about mindfulness training and staying calm and stuff like that. I mean, I'm just thinking back to last night, the 76ers and Timberwolves game, where Embiid and Towns
uh,
got into it, and,
yeah,
two hot-headed kind of guys getting into it. And so this is something that athletes of all levels, I think, could benefit from. And not everybody can pick it up after the first or second day or first or second session. It takes a while to really hone in these skills needed to practice mindfulness at really at a high level.
yeah, agreed. But I do want to say that mindfulness doesn't mean that you don't feel.
Right.
No, mindfulness doesn't make you calm. It doesn't keep you in a calm spirit at all times. You know what I mean? Mindfulness means you're living in the present. And if something in the present, is pissing you off, then it's okay to react to that in the present, you
Hmm.
know?
I think too, it's though
So
just reacting to it like appropriately. There's
yeah,
appropriate ways to react to things, and
yes,
inappropriate ways, obviously.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, yeah, and something like a fight, is the archaic brain kicking in, and just thinking about survival. Um, but that's just going to be, about how well are you, working on a practice. Like I get angry, I'm not to the point where I'm fist fighting. But I
Yeah,
get
yeah.
angry, and then I take a moment to really kind of, hear what's happening, see how I've elevated myself, and kind of think about, and this happens within a split second. We're not talking about a freeze in time here, within a split second or so, where I can kind of, you know, come back to a center, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but without a practice, that can be really hard.
Hmm. Um, I think maybe things like this aren't so mainstream, I guess, because
Mm,
this is some of the early stages of me hearing about some of these techniques myself. So
yeah.
when you kind of introduce these topics to people, and you might get some pushback. How do you kind of convince them that, this might be something worth trying out? If you've gone through those experiences, I guess, and
Yeah.
maybe there's been,
Oh, yeah. No, I've certainly gone through those experiences. I think the best way to convince someone that mindfulness works, or that these mindfulness practices, have benefits, is through example. I think when most people meet me as a coach, as a trainer, because they're different. Coaching and training is different. They should have a little bit more synergy, but I think that they, have separated themselves for some reason. Um, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Sorry, let me answer your question. I think when they meet me, they kind of, see the way that I carry myself, the way that, um, the way that, I listen to them, or or the responses that I give, and then even the way that, because most people I meet, and I'm talking about my program too, so the way that I articulate my plan, for my program, it's not it's not up in the air, it's not ethereal, it's very tangible. It's something that you can kind of be like, okay, I can see how that can correlate.
You got some
Um,
like hard data with you to
yeah,
show that. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So, it's not as hokey as it used to be. Um, but it takes some talking about, it takes a little bit of convincing. But once a parent puts their child, or their athlete into the program, they see it the first second, 2 seconds, that we get started, you know, from the way we introduce ourselves to the unity that we create, it's special.
hmm hmm when you were before, where you were a coach, and I think you actually had some time as a scout, if I remember correctly
Yeah.
from your biography there. Um, do you ever kind of look at a player and kind of think they may or may not be a good fit based on their mental state of the game? Or do you always try to give players a chance maybe to integrate themselves in the team? You know what I'm trying
Uh,
to say? Like,
yeah.
can you tell from first meeting a player, having gone through all of this training of mindfulness training and stuff personally for you, when you first meet a player, can you get a good sense of them right away and tell if they're going to be a good fit or not for a team?
Generally, yeah.
Hmm.
I think I've met a lot of players. I've been fortunate enough through some of the organizations I've been a part of, Jim Couch, Foundation, and they just had a invitational recently that, brings in the top 100, recruits around the country. So, it's a great opportunity to kind of get around some of these, future players. But absolutely, I can meet a player, and after a few conversations, especially after watching them play, warm up, and kind of the way they treat their teammates, I can probably make a pretty quick assessment on whether or not a player will be a good fit. But with that being said, there's always room, for improvement and change. So I don't ever condemn a player.
hmm
Um, but an assessment can be made, for sure.
hmm It's probably interesting too. I don't know if this has happened or not, but players, they may act some way in an interview style, communication with you. If you sit down to an interview with them, they may tell you certain answers, and then when you see them firsthand, it's maybe a different experience. And I can
Sure.
just think back to personal experiences witnessing that, um, and just me myself, just kind of, making a mental note of that. And I think it just actions almost speak louder than words, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, listen, there's something to being able to, sit down and compose yourself, in an interview status, because that can be nervous, can be nerve-wracking. But when you're having a human experience, you feel it less to wear these masks, you know. of I'm this way and at one point I'm this way at a different point, you know? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I think that's just what what we're seeing and what we're dealing with, you know.
Mm-hmm.
People not really having, adjusted to who they are and figuring that out, really digging in and saying, finding out who they are on the inside and then being comfortable with that and then being able to articulate that, consistently where they go.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, kind of, I guess, playing devil's advocate to my own point,
Yeah.
a lot of things that I kind of experienced based on my education and clinical experience is if a player or if somebody, doesn't matter what the skill is, isn't showing that skill, it could very just
Hmm.
well be that they've never been taught it before. So if you
Oh
see a
yeah.
player that doesn't, may not be reacting in certain situations the way that you would envision your players to react, it might
Hmm.
just be that they've never been told to react that way or never been taught to react that way or never had to react that way kind of thing. So it's always about like you said, you can fairly quickly make an assessment of a player to see where they're at right now, but never to condemn them because you don't know what happened their first 18 or 20 years of life that makes them respond that way. And I think everybody um, for the most part, with enough training and the proper training, can be taught how to respond appropriately for certain situations or how to carry themselves on the basketball court or whatever sport event they're playing in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, sure.
One thing I also wanted to touch on was, or was interested in hearing, is how you incorporate, all your principles and your training to helping athletes overcome injuries in the sense of the mental part of it. Because one thing that's kind of a consistent theme with the conversations I have with athletes and other professionals is having athletes overcome injuries mentally. So it could
Mm,
be, you know, there's kind of, I guess, the mental health side of it where they feel down or they have, they might be having some depression like behaviors.
mm,
Um, could also be, the recovery process of just getting that confidence back. If you think of an athlete that tears their ACL, they might be more hesitant to make that cut or that jump next time. Do you ever
yeah.
encounter those situations as a, practitioner or a coach? And if you have, what were some of the strategies that you used to help athletes overcome those things?
So I've never dealt with, well, that's not true. Sonny had a ACL injury. Um, I was gonna say I never dealt with with an athlete who was kind
Hmm.
of like recovering exclusively with me,
Hmm.
from an injury. But of course, the many athletes that I've seen who are coming back from injury and who are going to rehab and things of that nature to deal with it. But on the mental aspect, you can see that they're still moving gingerly, even though they may be cleared to play, you know. Um, and I've had conversations with athletes just kind of trying to tap into where the pain was, right? And I think that's the first thing that, I would work with an athlete on is, like where's the pain, And if they say, "Oh, the pain is in my leg," what they'll normally say is there actually is no pain. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So identifying that there is no pain first, because their head is telling that there's a pain,
Hmm.
right? And their body is responding as if there's a pain because there was a pain at one point. So I broke my years ago, maybe like 7 years ago or so. I broke my leg. I had a clean snap through the tibia and fibula. The leg was crazy, right?
Yeah, mangled. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So I went to, got an emergency surgery on it. They put a metal rod in through my leg, put a screw in my knee, screw in my ankle to hold in the metal rod. Bone grew around it, attached to the titanium rod, right? But for the longest time, about six, you know, I could have either done that emergency surgery or got a cast up to my hip and been in a wheelchair or, cast for 6 months, or I could have got the screw and then been, rehabbed after 6 months and be able to walk after 6 months. So
Hmm.
I went with the screw option. Anyway, 6 months, about 6 months, I was, feeling really, really good, almost like, this is like a brand new bionic knee,
Yeah.
uh, and it felt really, really good, and I was moving around really well. And as I was checking with rehab, they were really impressed with how quickly I bounced back. And then I saw an injury on television. I was watching like this biking event, and I saw an injury on television, a pretty nasty one, right?
Yeah.
And automatically it brought me back to my injury, and and then I was feeling the pain back into my leg, exactly where my injury was, when there was no actual pain there,
Hmm.
and it went on like this for like months, maybe like a year, before I can really talk to myself and really identified that there was no pain, and I was creating this, within my head. So if you fix the head, you fix everything else, you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, it's been a couple years since I took a neuroscience course, but from what I remember, it's like the neurons that are firing to and from the brain are just what's are sending the signals for,
Yeah.
pain responses or whatever it may be. In this instance, pain is most relevant. But it's crazy when you think about it, just like the brain almost like tricks your body into feeling pain, or
Yep.
tricks you into thinking that there's something wrong when there isn't something wrong, kind of thing. It's just crazy thinking about that. And even in the opposite case,
Yeah,
um,
there we go. There we go. And it can do in the opposite. It can
yeah,
do the opposite. It can make you, outperform, or overachieve.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. I'm thinking like, I when I used to play hockey, I would get like pucks off the foot or something. I wouldn't feel it in that moment, even though I
Hmm.
was hit, right? The injury is there, but I just never felt it. And then later on, you start feeling it. It's just, it has to be like, just the mental aspect of it is just so interesting, how the
Yeah,
brain is just so responsible for you feeling pain pretty much. It's not the actual injury that, you're
exactly.
feeling,
Yeah.
it's the brain that you're feeling, kind of thing. It's just fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Very fascinating.
And I think it gives just so much more, clout, for lack of a better word, for mindfulness training and things like this, when you kind of begin to understand how much of a role it actually plays in your motor actions and your, just your actions in general, and how you move around and everything. The brain is really the control center for everything. So if the brain isn't working at 100%, it's pretty much, near impossible for your body to be 100%.
Very true.
Mm.
Very true.
So what are your plans going forward? Are you sticking with the coaching clinic thing you're doing? Are you looking to get back into, I guess, of a more formal coaching role with the basketball team?
No, I'm actually not interested in coaching basketball anymore
Hmm.
in that way.
Hmm.
It was something that I, really, really enjoyed and loved. And I still love coaching, from the sidelines and and working with individual players, but I'm not actually interested in coaching a team. Um, but I am interested, very much. Um, like I said, I run a business, or even better, I don't like the word use the word business. I run a community, um, called Mindful Warrior, and we provide play programming for young athletes, and we're trying to redefine kind of what play means, and kind
Hmm.
of allow these, younger athletes to grow up in a play culture, that rewards them for their athletic ability and talents and gifts, but also rewards them for their mindfulness, and
Hmm.
how they and how they approach sports. We want to kind of leave that, you know um it's all or nothing attitude, and pick up one that, we can have competitive play without, you know without without competition,
Hmm.
almost, you know um
What do you mean by that, by
and
not having competition,
yeah.
in competitive play?
um so maybe I need to reframe that a little bit. All right. So we want to compete and
Mhm.
we want to be competitive, but we don't need, but it doesn't need to be aggressive, you know?
Right.
Um, so, the idea, so let's just take kind of how training, and how basketball has been viewed and brought up. So I was very fortunate. I was brought up in a very loving basketball environment. I had a high school basketball coach, Jason Simo, shout out to him, who was an amazing character builder of young men, you know. Um, and he was firm, but he was fair, he was open, he let us express ourselves in ways that were individual to each one of us. And because of that, we were able to come together as a team. He didn't create a box that he tried to fit us all in. He let us all be who we were, you know, and we did really, really, and we had an amazing high school basketball career, for the school, for this, for the county, and for each one of us. I'm sure I'm, almost 40, and I remember my high school games, every single one of them, like they were the best days of my life.
Hmm.
But then I went to college, and when I got to college, I had a coach who maybe thought that cursing, screaming, yelling, aggression was the way that he'd get something from his players, and I didn't respond to that at all, and a lot of the other players who were with me didn't respond to that at all. But there were some players who responded really well to that, depending on their environment, where they grew up, who they, how they were conditioned to learn how to play basketball. And I call that, playing under duress. You're almost playing because people are forcing you to play,
Hmm.
forcing you
You're
to
not
play
you're not
hard.
you're not playing for like um
Not for
to
fun.
get something good out of it. You're playing to avoid something bad.
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly, exactly. So now you have two kids that are going against each other. One grew up in a play environment that was about being competitive, but having fun, another one grew up playing basketball under duress. It's all aggression, and there's no fun in this. I'm doing this because if I didn't, in the back of my head, my dad's on the sidelines, screaming and yelling at me. In the back of my head, my coach, from preschool, is screaming and yelling at me and saying, you're the biggest kid on the court. Why can't you just da da da?
Mm.
Like, we're all kind of dealing with our conditionings, and things that are in the things that are, in our past. Um, so we're just trying to create an environment where play is competitive but not aggressive. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we learn how to play the same way. That way, when we go out, I can compete hard against you, but it's not malicious because there's nobody in the background telling me about my individual, telling me about my individual skill, what I can't do, what I should do, what I should have done. You know what I mean? We're just
Yeah.
all there, but then we do the training. We give these kids the skills, the mobility. We work on their bodies. We give them the flexibility, the mobility. We give them the speed, the strength. We give them all the training and conditioning that they need, and then we give them the basketball training from the fundamentals, from the right, left, and up for the layups, all the way to a shooting form, and learning how to properly place our hand on the basketball to give it the right amount of spin, to flop the wrist instead of flick the wrist, all these things, to have your feet lined up to the rim, so all those things that we give them the fundamentals. And then as they build with that kind of environment and that kind of training and skills, now you have an athlete who's not only mindful, but also knows everything to do. Now they can go out in the world and just have a human experience while playing basketball and play from what we call, in the zone, right? Or locked
Mm-hmm.
in, you know.
I
That's
think it all
that's
yeah,
that's what we want to
it all
create.
ties back I think to motivation, like how you were mentioning how some athletes they play to get something good out of it, some athletes they play to avoid something bad, and when you're just thinking about long-term motivation or just long-term burnout of playing the game basketball, I'm sure 99 times out of 100 the player that's playing basketball with a supportive coach, um, that that is then giving that athlete that internal motivation almost to get to play basketball, like they're getting something good out of it for themselves that feels good and stuff like that. I would assume that that athlete is able to play basketball longer just mentally, compared to an athlete that, like you said, is playing under duress, that is just constantly trying to just avoid bad situations, and that's why they're playing basketball. Like they don't want to piss their coach off or something. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
compare the two, like long-term motivation, burnout. I would assume that the one athlete that plays to get something good out of the game is just going
Yeah.
to have a more long career, than an athlete that, plays under duress, like you mentioned. And then going back
Yeah.
where we started at the beginning of the podcast with Vince Carter, if he's in the
Yeah.
league for 20 years or something, you have to assume that he has that mindfulness
I
locked
I
down.
I
Yeah.
I absolutely believe Vince has got that mindfulness lockdown. I think I think Vince has benefited from just being uber talented,
Mm.
and he just seems, I don't know him personally, but he just seems like a such a decent dude. I know when he was at North Carolina, he played behind Antoine Jameson, um, but I didn't hear about or see any friction, because Vince was definitely the reason why people bought tickets.
Right.
Um, and I didn't see or hear any riffs. He was just an amazing young athlete who looked like he was really out there enjoying basketball. And I can tell some of the other people that were playing were there thinking about, will I make it to the NBA? And that's all they're thinking about.
Yeah.
They're forecasting their future. So they can't enjoy basketball. There's been very few people who I think have come through um, you know, the highest ranks of college basketball onto the NBA who have actually enjoyed playing basketball. I think they haven't enjoyed basketball since they were young, young men and young women. And I think that's unfortunate. You know,
Hmm.
if
Yeah.
I could think of someone who I think like really, really loved basketball and enjoyed it, like I think of Sebastian Napier when he was at UConn. He looked like
Yeah.
he was just having a ball. Oh my God, he looked
Yeah.
like he loved it. You know,
Yeah.
JJ Redick looked like he absolutely, when he was at Duke, and I'm dating myself probably, but he looked like he was having the most amazing time of his life, you know. Um, and that's, those kind of things. Maybe these guys didn't have a mindfulness practice in particular, but when you can be in the moment and just really enjoy it, that's practice enough,
Yeah.
you know, practice enough.
One guy that comes to mind to me, when I watch basketball, or when I still watch basketball, obviously, but just one player in particular, being a Buckeyes fan, was Aaron Kraft. Just watching him play on the basketball court, he just, for some reason, his
Mhm,
just demeanor and the way he carried himself on the court, um,
mhm.
almost as like the leader of that team in some regards. Even though he might not have been the best player, he still had a lot of those leadership qualities, and that's one player that always sticks out for me when I think about, um, you know, athletes having a high level of a of a mental state of the game, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, we change sports. I'll just give you one more example. Cam Newton, when he was when there was a huge buzz around him, when North Carolina was doing really, really well. Oh man, he loved playing football. You know, you can
Hmm.
just you can just tell, and everyone else could tell because that's when his marketability went up. This is Jay. What's the big guy's name? Who's all Rob Gronkowski. He
Right, right.
loves life. You know what I mean? These are just, and you don't understand when you love what you do, when you're just in the moment, when you're present. Other people strive to be that. That's why these guys are so marketable. That's why these guys are out in the front. People are, that's why these people are looking at them as leaders and want to be like them because they just are present in the moment and enjoying what's happening.
Hmm. And I think it even takes another level of almost self-awareness, someone like Gronkowski, to realize, that he's starting to his mental performance, I guess, or his love for the game is just starting to decline, and to be able to recognize that, and
Yeah.
almost not have an inflated ego, have almost an
Yeah.
ego check, and remove himself from the game. And I think that is probably the hardest thing an athlete can go through, is retiring.
It is, but I don't think it has to be.
Right.
I don't think it has to be. I know it doesn't have to be, but it is. Because we've been taught. Again, conditioning. We've been taught to to that, especially if you're a basketball player and you're, highly ranked. I mean, I just met the top ranked ninth grader in the country. I'm like, but you're in ninth grade, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But he was like, really, really, and it's an accomplishment to be ranked that way, sure, but but that ranking may not mean anything, like at all,
Yeah.
but we're putting so much pressure on our young ones, that they can't enjoy the game,
Yeah. It almost seems like as time goes by, we put more and more pressure on kids because I'm going to assume, I mean, that maybe in the 60s or 70s there wasn't so much hype around 9
Yeah,
or 10th graders. Could be,
no.
because of technology, we don't have the access to it, but I would still assume that it's not at the level still that it is now. And maybe technology has a role to play in it. We shouldn't dismiss it too much. But when I think of, the Ball brothers or something, or especially Mellow Ball, who, from
Yeah,
ninth and 10th grade is just put on this basically at the forefront of basketball
yeah,
in the country. Everybody, I think that's somewhat involved in basketball knows who Mellow Ball is, or at least the Ball family.
yeah.
And it's just I'm intrigued to see how what the future holds for young athletes, and how young can we kind of go here of starting to crown young athletes as the next big thing. Would it be eighth or seventh graders or something?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're already doing it, and I think that, what happens is not only it's okay to recognize, these young players. I don't want to disagree with recognizing them.
For sure, yeah.
Um, but what tools are we giving them to deal with life, you know? Because you can be the number one draft pick, but eventually basketball ends,
Hmm.
our bodies, have a certain amount of time to be at peak performance level, and then they decline from that a bit. They don't have to disintegrate, right away, but they decline from that a bit, and when they decline from that, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to transition to something else,
Yeah, there is life after whatever sport you play. It doesn't have to just be basketball, but any football, whatever, of
but
course, any sport.
and it can still be in the world of play. I
Hmm.
think that, as we talk about, redefining play, it could still be in the world of play. You can just, now be someone who's creating that environment,
Yeah.
um yeah.
Listen, man, I gotta bounce to work right now, but again, really appreciate you taking the time out of your morning to come on board, and I hope we can do this again sometime in the future. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, again for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed any part of it, please share it with your friends and family, and I'll speak to you next time.